So let's introduce David Powell. Yep. He's the president of Prodoscore, and he's so kind to come in and share more about his company today. They have some wicked cool use cases. Now that 80% roughly of the workforce is at home, for both employee and leadership, how do we marry that up? You know, leadership is looking for metrics. Employees are looking for guidance. What is out there that helps companies work in unison and work like a centralized organization when it's decentralized? So David's got some great use cases to share. Yeah.
Test. All right. And to pile on the cybersecurity stuff, I worked for a cybersecurity company before I came to Prodoscore. So real quick, is always interesting about clients who have this like cybersecurity insurance policy. They feel it's their get out of jail free cards, like, oh, I don't need all this stuff. I have this cyber policy. But just like if I got drunk today and drove home, that State Farm doesn't cover negligence. If I was operating a DUI and I have a crash, they don't cover that. Similarly, these cybersecurity insurance policies have like best practices, like did you do cybersecurity awareness training and all this kind of stuff built in there. So these companies think that they have this like get out of jail free card, but if you read the fine print, it's kind of like driving drunk. So make sure you're doing all the stuff that just having a policy is not the get out of jail free card. So that's free. It's not what we do at Prodoscore. So at Prodoscore, you probably remember like the before times, before the Rona, right? And you were sitting in the office and you were in the conference room and everyone was standing outside the conference room with their laptops waiting on you to finish up your meeting. It was running a little late to come in there and stuff like that. And the things that happened in the office, you know, you had this like strong sense of camaraderie. A strong sense of camaraderie. And you had LaCroix in the fridge in the break room and Cliff Bars and a ping pong table. And, you know, everything was great. And there was like all this teamwork and the companies were like shoving you together and you had these like cool office spaces and, you know, you got the chess table over here and you had that ping pong table up front that no one would use because the boss wanted it for culture, but you couldn't actually, you know, play ping pong because that was frowned upon, right? But then, you know, companies had embraced this idea of like, let's take everybody and put them shoulder to shoulder at IKEA desks. And that's going to be like super cool. And employees kind of actually hated that, okay? It's like companies love it because you can shove a whole lot of people into a certain amount of square footage to keep your Class A office expenses down, but employees didn't really like that. And now, is anybody like desperate to go back and sit next to the guy during allergy season? It's like, you know, coughing and sneezing and all this kind of stuff. People have a little bit different feel about how close they may want to be to their coworkers. What also came with the before times is like this soul-crushing commute, right? Is that you had these long commutes, long drives, all this kind of stuff. That was kind of miserable. You always had this tension of like, how early do I need to leave so I can make my daughter's dance thing or my son's baseball thing and all this kind of stuff. And there was this like kind of crush around that. But if you talk to people now, they also will tell you that you could run errands, right? You could run errands on the way to the office. You could run errands on the way home. You could have that dentist appointment mid-afternoon. And now when you're working from home and like they were talking about earlier, a Zoom meeting every 30 minutes on your calendar, like when do you go to the dentist? When do you go run some errands? And now it's taking up your Saturdays. And you used to could do that kind of on the way or to or fro. So last March, right, a year ago March, you know, all of a sudden all your coworkers became these little squares on your screen. And that was like kind of cool at first. You're like, oh, I can have the business mullet, right? Which is like a button down and then like sweatpants on the bottom or pants at all, maybe perhaps. So, you know, all that kind of stuff began to change and people began to like dig it. It's like, hey, this is pretty cool. I'm like working remote. I like this idea, all this kind of stuff. What's interesting is that our data shows that and we'll talk more about this in a minute, but there's settlers and nomads. So within remote workers, there's settlers, and those are the people that when you get on a Zoom call, they're in the same place every day. They have dedicated home office workspace. Then you have nomads, and those are the ones that one day you're getting them in the carpool line, one day you're getting them at the ball field, then in a Starbucks, and they're kind of like floating around. Our data shows that if you have dedicated office space at home, you're more productive than those that are the nomadic ones. We'll talk more about that in a minute. But what you really see talking to people is that this was at the office and this is at home, right? Is that at the office, you were sitting in traffic, you were in the break room talking with your coworkers, you're grabbing some coffee, you were getting lunch, and working was this tiny little bit. I think he was talking earlier that when he goes in the office, people like come and chat with you and stuff. And this, now people are working remote, and man, it just feels like you're working all the time. Like when we talk to our clients, a lot of them will tell you that before, meetings usually occurred from like 10 to 2. People didn't really schedule meetings before 10, didn't really schedule them that ended after 3. Why? Because in bigger cities, people would like have that commute where maybe they would come in really early, so they were like a 6 to 3. You have other people that were like coming in after traffic, so they were like a more 9 to 6 employees. So you just had them in that kind of middle of the day meeting times. Now people know, oh, everyone's at home. There's this expectation of availability. So you'll get that 7 o'clock Zoom meeting, you'll get that 4 o'clock Zoom meeting, and somewhere in there you want to take your own life. And so that's really what, this thing has happened, is that people are like, oh, I'm giving up a whole lot to work from home. So not everyone really kind of digs this scenario. It's where, how do I feel connected? I get these questions all the time from customers. They're like, how do we build company culture when everyone's remote? And I'm like, well, how did you build it before? And what it really happened before is they didn't have a program. What they did was like Lori would grab a bunch of people after work, take her company credit card, you go down the corner bar, she'd drop her credit card behind the bar, and we have like happy hour for an hour, and everyone like, yay, this is fun, we're drinking for free on the company. And that was like company culture. That was like the extent of it. Now you're gonna have to be much more intentional around how you build company culture if you have people that are remote. The other people who really hate working from home are people with small kids. Okay, is that our data is very clear on this, is that the people with older kids, yeah, they're down for working remote because those kids can drive themselves places, they can go places and stuff like that. But when you got little kids, it's like a challenge, right? Is they're kind of like moving around all day trying to figure out where can I escape to go do some work. And you talk to people in big cities, like San Fran, where your $5,000 a month gets you 50 square feet, or like Brooklyn, people like that, they have hated this work from home culture because they didn't want to be in their tiny little expensive hovel. They wanted to be out and about in the city. And when you can't be out and about in the city and you're chained to your little, 1,000 square foot place, it's pretty miserable. And now what you have is companies looking at all this office space on their P&L and they're saying, what in the world do we do with all this office space, right? One of our clients we were talking to in Chicago, they were in the inner loop downtown, and he had a bunch of millennials that worked for him, and everyone lived within a 7-minute walk of the office. Well, then last summer when people were burning down the CVS's and the Walgreens in downtown Chicago, suddenly those people didn't want to live there anymore. So they all moved out to the suburbs. So he's like, if I have a return to work call, people who used to walk 10 minutes to the office are now going to have an hour and a half commute. They're not going to want to do that. So they're going to quit probably if I say, hey, come back to the office. So now I like these people. So do I get rid of my downtown office space, which is kind of pimped out and cool? Or do I get little WeWorks in the suburbs so that people can, meet together there? This, when you stack rank a P&L, people's the most expensive thing, office space is number 2. So how do people think about this part? So what you've got, though, is this huge struggle where companies don't know what this answer is. Okay, if you talk to HR people, they'll tell you every other HR problem you've ever had, there's someone else you could call as an HR professional and ask them about it. So, if you had the alcoholic in the workplace or sexual harassment, you could call another HR buddy and say, hey, what'd you do when this person's alcoholic? Or what'd you do with the sexual harassment thing? They could give you advice. No one has the answer for how do we return to work after a global pandemic and a technology-driven era, right? I mean, you could go back and tell somebody about the Spanish flu of 1918, but they didn't have technology. Everybody just came back to the office, right? Actually, they were probably in the fields in 1918. But so there's no one that has this answer. So all these companies are trying to figure this out. Everyone went home in March of that year without a plan, right? What did they tell you? Go home. Grab your monitor, go to the house. We'll figure it out. And in the NCAA basketball tournament, the rule in the NCAA basketball tournament is survive and advance, right? It doesn't matter if you play poorly, you just have to win and go to the next round. That's the way most companies have managed the past 18 months, is survive and advance, right? Just make sure business still happens, but they didn't have a plan. But now no one's gonna return to the office without a plan. Right, they're not going to allow them to say, all right, everybody come back, because people aren't going to come back. So now they're trying to figure out what does this plan look like. And to have a good plan, you need to have the right tools. I don't know if you've ever tried to do a home improvement project and have the wrong tool. If you got the wrong tool, it sucks. It's miserable. But if you got the right tool, it works really well. A friend of mine, I was telling him earlier, flies for this billionaire family in Birmingham. And I've hung around the hangar some and stuff. And before pilots go, they do this walk around. They walk around the plane. The first thing you're looking for is see if there's hydraulic fluid puddled, somewhere, fuel leaking, all this kind of stuff. You do this walk around. That's how most business people managed before, right? Is that management was kind of before. You just kind of walk around the office and like, oh, somebody got here at 8, somebody left at 5. Oh, I see they look a little frustrated today. Maybe I should ask them, how's your day going? Call them in for a management meeting and I'm going to manage them and all this kind of stuff. Or man, that guy sure to spend a lot of time in the break room talking about his son's travel baseball team. And that was the way that people managed, but they didn't have good data. So if I showed up at 8 and left at 5, right? And if this guy showed up at 9 and left at 4, but I'm standing in the break room talking about sports and he comes in, puts his headphones in and busts his butt from 9 to 4, who was really like working, right? And so you didn't have that visibility. When a pilot takes off, he has all the data in the world to navigate where it is he needs to go. But companies don't have this kind of data around their employee productivity base. They know what their utilization on their company cars are. They know what the expenses are per person. They know about office space utilization, but they don't know who's actually working and who's not. And now in a remote workforce, how do you have any visibility into that? So you've probably never heard of Prodoscore until today. You've heard a lot of the people talking about us. We've got like 30 employees, right? And so we're post-startup, but we're not, fully growed or anything. But we've been in the Wall Street Journal this year. We've been in Forbes. We've been in Inc. We've been on CNBC, all this kind of stuff. And we have like enviable coverage because what we're talking about is relevant and hot. Okay, so what does our data show? This is always kind of like one of our slides that we talk about with our clients. Our data shows that 10% of any workforce is low productivity. What does that actually translate to? They're doing an hour and 35 minutes of work a day, right? That's it, of trackable work. Now, does that mean they're doing work that's outside of our system that we can't track? Sure, but no matter how much you're doing, that ain't enough. Right? And so by most companies, by the time the boss has gotten there and had their second cup of coffee, 10% of their workforce is pretty much done for the day, which is crazy. So you think about the average salary of maybe $60,000 a year at a company, this person is your highest paid person on a per hour work basis, right? Because they're only knocking out about an hour and a half of work. So what do we see then is that you got employees want flexibility. I want to work whenever, from wherever, however I want. If I'm in pajamas at the lake or at the beach place or at my parents' home or wherever it is, I want to work from wherever, whenever. Companies, though, are demanding accountability. Is that what time you showed up, what time you left was a horrible proxy for whether or not you were working before. That's the only thing we had. Right? The only thing we really had before, because look, everybody's like, there's certain jobs, sales is pretty easy, or you're either selling something or you're not. But we have a client that have 800 employees, they have 150 in sales, and he said, David, I have no clue what the other 650 are doing. Right? I know what my 150 are doing, but I have no clue what the other 650 are doing. So they want some accountability around that. And the only way both people get what they want is with visibility. So I often talk about my son's 22, my daughter's 19. My son was too old to have Life 360. Do y'all know what Life 360 is? This app on your phone, right? So what did he have to do? If you're changing locations, text us. If it was 11:45, what am I doing? I'm texting him, are you on your way home yet? I was going to say, he felt micromanaged because we wanted to know where he was and what he was doing. My daughter, she has Life 360 on her phone. She never checks in, right? Because I can look and see that she's at, Lindsay's house, and then she went over to Katie's house. It's 11:45. I can check, see she's on the interstate on her way home. So she doesn't feel micromanaged because I have this visibility into what she was doing. So that's where Prodoscore comes into play, is that we can provide you that visibility into what your employees are doing. Then you don't feel the need to call them at 8 o'clock and make sure they're sitting at the desk, or call them at 4:55 and make sure they haven't cut out early. So we really give those three things: visibility, flexibility, accountability. We'll just skip on past that in the interest of time. But I think the key thing to think about is that we're like the check engine light. So my daughter has this used Volvo SUV, and when the check engine light came on one time, my heart sank, right? Because you're like, oh, this is going to be expensive. It's a Volvo, blah, blah, blah. But there's also the dad in you. It's like, she's going to have the safest car you can find, and that's a Volvo. So, we take it to the shop, and I'm sitting there thinking, this would be $3,000. I used to have a BMW, and every time I went in the shop, it was like $3,000. So I take my daughter's car to the shop, it was $85. It was this little clip had come off holding one of the, plug cover things on it, had worked its way off, so they put a little zip tie on it and clipped it down, and I'm like, when do you ever take the car to the shop? It's $85. It's like, jackpot. Then she ran over something later and had to replace the whole wheel. So whatever. But when the check engine light comes on, you don't ignore it, right? You do something about it. Prodoscore, we take the data of what your employees are doing and run it through Google AI and ML and present a productivity score by employee, by department, okay? And what is that? Does that mean you go fire somebody if they have a low productivity score? No. What it means is their check engine light is going off. So go talk to them. And it could be their low productivity is because their manager sucks, or they're on a project they hate, or they've got a sick family member, or their kids got sent home from quarantine for 2 weeks from school and they've been like barely, getting by. Or the check engine light could be that somebody is like working all the time at full boil. And what that tells you is that's non-sustainable. The person's going to burn out, they're going to quit. And what you don't want is for the first time you to find out that they feel overworked and overwhelmed is when they walk in with their 2-week notice and they're one of your best people walking out the door. You want to have that conversation early. The way most people manage is they sprinkle a little bit of management across all their people, right? I'm going to manage you for a little bit, and you for a little bit, and you for a little bit, and you for a little bit. This really helps you focus your efforts. I don't need to spend any time on them and them. I need to go talk to this guy because he's either about to burn out or he's not doing anything, and we need to figure out why. So this visibility, we can give you a chart, a heartbeat that shows what they're doing throughout the day. So you can quickly glance at an employee and see what they're doing. So you can see what we tie in like 70 different integrations. We tie into Salesforce, Slack, G Suite, Office, all these different applications. So we could Sales Monday, Ring Central. So we could tie into all these things and pull this down, and you can see their day laid out on a productivity basis, and you can see when they were doing certain things by icons. So you can see when they were sending emails, when they were on a phone call. You can tell when their camera was on in a Zoom meeting, all this kind of stuff. We can also show you like gap time where they weren't working at all. Does that mean that they're like bad people? No, it means they're taking a lunch or they're walking their dog or whatever it is. What you're looking for are trends. So what you want to find is like this person has tons of gap time, and we find some people who come in and they like knock out a whole bunch of stuff at the start of the day and then they don't really do anything the rest of the day. That's information you want to know so you can manage them more effectively. And by giving you a single score helps you make a decision quickly. It's kind of like your FICO score, right? Is that if your FICO score, there's like a bazillion different little inputs. It's mystery. No one really knows how that score is created. But if you walk into a car dealership, they get your score and they can tell whether or not you're a good risk or a bad risk on loaning you money. Similarly, taking all these data endpoints and giving you that one kind of score is a quick way to say, hey, this employee needs some extra love or investigation or something. We can also do sentiment analysis where we take your emails and your phone transcripts and we can run those through Google NLP and give you like sentiment analysis by phone call, by email. So you can see as an employee begins to get disgruntled, over time, or that, know what a PETA is? Pain in the ass. Yeah, so you can find that PETA employee, the one that everyone's kind of griping about. Maybe they're high productivity, but if their sentiment analysis is always like the red frowny face, then you really maybe have to go have that conversation with that person and say, hey, buddy, you're like a pain to deal with. No one likes working with you. Need you to change or coach them up or coach them out. So that is the quick answer of what Prodoscore does. As companies, we, just like Zoom was not a COVID play, but it certainly benefited from COVID. We are not a COVID play, but we're benefiting from this return to work conversation because as companies are looking at a plan to go back, they are like, okay, if we are going to allow our employees to work remote, how do we prove to the board or how do we prove to the C-suite that we're holding these people accountable to doing something? And it's become a super hot topic. Real quick, we use the backend API. Some of the other software out there is like keystroke logging and all this kind of stuff. I don't care if you're on YouTube or Facebook. We don't track that. We can't track that. We can only track the business issued applications. So we're non-invasive. We're like, hey, tell us what the business applications are, and we can tell you how your user community is engaging with those things, as opposed to let's go sniff out, what YouTube they're doing or what their bank account information is because they have that tab open and we happen to be doing screen scrapes at that time or whatever. So that's what Prodoscore does. Happy to talk to y'all about it. We think it's kind of an interesting little niche that really offers visibility people didn't have before. So thanks.
So David, we're running kind of short on time, so I don't think we're going to be able to do the panel, but I do want to open up the floor for questions. But before you sit, Vonage Business is one of our core partners that we do a lot of work with. And you guys have a great use case with Vonage. Can you give everybody just a highlight of like, what does this look like in practicality inside of a company?
Yeah, so they use it to correlate. So John Wooden, who was the coach at UCLA, he had this famous phrase, never confuse activities with accomplishments, right? And a lot of companies measure accomplishments, that you were at 208% of quota, right? But Vonage uses us to correlate the activities with that. So what does that mean is one of our clients was telling us that they had somebody who was at a high quota attainment, but their activity was really low. And they're like, well, why? And they began to look into it. What they found was that she was just squatting on a great territory, right? She had a great territory, so she didn't have to work that hard, but she was at 200% of quota. So it's what are the activities? So you're beginning to look at that. And then how do you model your best performing people based on their activities to show other people? So like Vonage does a good job at that, where sometimes you have like that top performer and you're like, God, I wish I could have another one just like them, but you don't know how to find them. Well, this way you can look at them and profile what they're doing and then train your other people to do it like they're doing. If they do emails in the morning and stuff, calls in the afternoon.
They went to a completely remote model.
Correct.
They started that before COVID, and now they only have corporate office. So there's thousands of employees across the whole planet, and they really had no way to measure anything and create that culture. And we know a lot of the sales and account management people, they actually like this because it takes the Salesforce data, the Google data, it takes their Slack channel, it correlates all of that. And they even track the sentiment too, because like Vonage will push out different initiatives. And the company needs to know, are they talking about those initiatives? How many times are they talking about it? How is it received from the client community? And your tool is correlating all of that information.
So like when he was talking about SOC as a service earlier, if he had told his sales team, we're going to this quarter push SOC as a service, you could go into Prodoscore and type in SOC as a service and it will return every email or phone call that mentions SOC as a service. So then you could see, oh, these 3 sales guys took to heart what I told them. These people down here are non-compliant. I need to get on them.
To be a remote salesperson, a lot of the feedback we get is I'm on an island. I don't know anything. So these things allow them to get a script. They know what they're supposed to say. They know how they're supposed to say it. So it kind of works on the opposite side, that I think the employees appreciate having a blueprint to follow, because they don't get the office chatter. They don't get to hear the other folks in the office. So
one of them said that one of their best successful salespeople they noticed on here spent time on LinkedIn before every sales call. So they're like, okay, he's doing his research beforehand, which is smart, but you can teach that.
Yeah, but it's kind of capturing the best practice for the business. So
Correct.
At any rate, I think a lot of companies, as they make that formal decision, and most companies are going to stay with a hybrid, it's just tools and information that might make that a better experience for everyone involved.